They thought he was just another tired drifter until they kicked him out. Keanu Reeves, quietly dressed and unrecognizable, was humiliated in front of a packed restaurant. But what he did next didn't just shock the staff. It changed the entire community. Who would have guessed the man they rejected was about to rewrite their future? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The autumn air in Silver Lake carried a cool stillness that made the streetlights glow a little softer than usual. Keanu Reeves walked quietly along the narrow sidewalk, his hands tucked into the pockets of a black hoodie that had seen years of use. His jeans were faded, the knees softened from long motorcycle rides and volunteer days at the community center. His boots were scuffed from hours spent helping teenagers rebuild donated bicycles. It had been a long day, but a meaningful one, and he wanted nothing more than a quiet meal in the little diner he had come to appreciate over the past few months. The Silver Lake Sunrise Diner was small, multicultural, and full of character. A Vietnamese grandmother ran the kitchen. A Salvadoran father handled the grill. A pair of college students took turns serving tables to save money for tuition. The place smelled of warm broth, grilled chicken, and freshly brewed tea. It was the kind of restaurant where people lingered even after finishing their meals, not because the food was fancy, but because the space felt safe, familiar, and a little bit magical. Keanu had discovered it by accident, slipping in unnoticed one afternoon after a charity meeting. No one inside recognized him, which was a rare gift. He returned again and again because anonymity allowed him to sit with his thoughts without the weight of cameras or curious stares. Tonight, he hoped for the same peace. He had spent the entire afternoon helping restock the community center's pantry and teaching workshop students how to patch motorcycle tires. His back ached, but in a satisfying way. All he wanted was a bowl of soup and a quiet place to unwind. He pulled open the door. The bell above it chimed softly as he stepped inside. Conversations hummed throughout the room. A couple debated movie choices from the 90s. A group of students talked about exams. A grandmother fed her grandson spoonfuls of rice. Keanu nodded politely as he passed a table, careful not to disturb anyone. For a few seconds, it felt like every other evening he had spent here. Familiar, comfortable. But tonight, something had changed. The usual hostess, a cheerful middle-aged woman named Min, was missing. Instead, a new hostess stood behind the counter. A young woman, early 20s, sharply dressed for a place this casual. Her name tag read Ivy. She was typing something on a tablet when she noticed Keanu approaching. At first, her expression stayed neutral, then curiosity flickered across her face as she took in his worn clothes, his tired posture, and the hood pulled low around his face. She straightened her shoulders. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped in a way that made Keanu pause. "Before I seat you, I need to see some identification." Keanu blinked, surprised. "Identification?" "For dining, it's policy," she answered, though her body language revealed uncertainty. "And this area gets unusual guests sometimes. I need to verify who I'm speaking to." There was no irritation in his voice when he replied, "Of course." He reached slowly into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed her his ID. She snatched it quicker than she realized, adjusting her stance as if preparing for confrontation. She looked at the card, then looked at him, then back at the card. Her eyebrows lifted. "You're trying to tell me you're Keanu Reeves?" Her voice grew loud enough that a few nearby customers turned their heads. Keanu offered a small, peaceful smile that carried no defense or pride. "That is my name." Ivy let out a soft, incredulous laugh, not amused, not impressed, something closer to disbelief that curdled into suspicion. And that moment, small as it was, began the unraveling of the night. Ivy held the ID up toward the ceiling lights, tilting it one way, and then another, as if she were inspecting a suspicious dollar bill. Her expression darkened the longer she looked at it. Her lips tightened, her breath sharpened. It was clear she believed she had caught someone trying to play a trick on her. A few diners nearby lowered their conversations to whispers sensing tension rising at the entrance. Keanu stood still, hands loosely at his sides. He didn't shift his weight or explain himself. Years of life had taught him that not every misunderstanding required force to resolve. Sometimes patience, even in uncomfortable moments, softened situations before they escalated. But Ivy didn't soften. "This looks fake," she declared loud enough for the grandmother feeding her grandson to turn in her seat. "You expect me to believe Keanu Reeves would walk in here dressed like this?" She gestured to his hoodie and faded jeans, her voice carrying disbelief and an edge of ridicule. Keanu met her gaze calmly. "It is my real ID." She scoffed. "Right. And I'm supposed to just believe that one of the most famous actors alive is wandering into a tiny diner at 9 o'clock at night. No security, no sunglasses, no entourage, no reservation." "It's a good place," Keanu said gently, "and I've been here many times." "Well, not with me working," Ivy snapped. "And I'm telling you something isn't right. People fake celebrity identities to get attention, or free food, or who knows what." "I'm not falling for it." Several tables had gone quiet. The group of students near the window exchanged uncomfortable glances. A father, resting his arm around his daughter, leaned in closer, watching carefully. A waiter froze halfway between the kitchen and a booth, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Keanu didn't raise his voice. "If you'd like, you can ask the owner. She knows me." "The owner isn't here," Ivy shot back. "And even if she were, I doubt she'd know some guy pretending to be Keanu Reeves." Her words hit with more force than she realized, not because Keanu cared about being recognized, but because in this place, in these walls, he had thought he found a small corner of normal life, a space where he could eat soup after long volunteer days without being looked at sideways, a space where his presence didn't need to be scrutinized or doubted. Tonight, that space collapsed. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm not pretending to be anyone. I'm just here to eat." "Not with this ID," Ivy responded, holding it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. "This is obviously fake. Look at this photo. Look at your hair now. Look at the edges. It's cheap. I don't appreciate being lied to on my shift." A sharp hush fell over the closest tables. "I'm not lying to you," Keanu answered. "I'm sorry for the confusion. Really. But if this is an issue, I can simply find somewhere else to eat." Ivy crossed her arms. "Good, because you're not staying here." For the first time, Keanu felt a faint sting behind the ribs, not of anger, but of sadness. This wasn't about a meal. It was the tone, the assumption, the dismissal of a human being based on clothing and an idea of who belonged where. He extended his hand. "May I have my ID back?" She placed it in his palm with a dismissive flick, then turned to another server and muttered under her breath, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. The nerve of some people. As if Keanu Reeves would ever step foot in a place like this. Keanu closed his wallet, exhaled slowly, and looked around the room. Faces stared back, some pitying, some confused, some embarrassed on his behalf. He offered them all a small, reassuring nod. Then he walked toward the exit. And as he reached for the door, Ivy called out one final time. "Next time you want to pretend to be famous, pick someone believable." The bell above the door chimed as he stepped back into the cool Silver Lake air. Outside, the night felt colder than when he had first arrived. Keanu paused beneath the soft glow of the street lamp, letting the noise of the diner fade behind him. The distant hum of traffic from Sunset Boulevard blended with laughter from a nearby cafe, but none of it broke the heaviness settling over his chest. He slipped his wallet back into his pocket and adjusted the hood of his sweatshirt, not out of shame, but to steady himself against a feeling he hadn't expected. It wasn't humiliation, it wasn't anger, it was something quieter, something he knew well, a reminder that even the gentlest intentions could be misunderstood, and even the humblest people could be misjudged. Through the diner window, he saw Ivy laughing with another employee, already dismissing the moment as if it had never happened. For her, it had been a minor inconvenience. For him, it revealed something deeper about the world he moved through, unseen, yet constantly evaluated. He turned away from the window and began walking down the empty sidewalk, his footsteps echoing softly. He didn't look back again, but as he reached the corner, one thought rose above the rest. There had to be a better way to respond than walking away. Keanu's house in the Hollywood Hills sat quietly against the dark sky, its warm interior light spilling faintly across the driveway as he approached. It was modest for someone of his fame. Single story tucked behind trees, built more for privacy than display, the kind of place that held memories instead of attention. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of sandalwood greeted him, calming the lingering weight in his chest. He hung his keys on the small wooden hook by the door, the one he had carved years ago during a quiet winter with nothing but time and solitude. His dog Scout bounded toward him with soft urgency, tail wagging in wide arcs. Keanu knelt, running a hand along the dog's fur, feeling some of the tension slip away. Scout nudged his face, sensing something was off, then pressed closer. Keanu smiled gently and whispered that everything was fine, even though the knot in his stomach hadn't eased since he'd left the diner. He walked into the living room and flicked on a lamp beside the old record shelf. The room was a patchwork of things he treasured. Stacks of books he had collected over the years, vinyl records from musicians he admired. A framed photograph of his sister Kim laughing on a sunny afternoon, another of his mother holding him as a baby, and one more tucked quietly on a side table, showing him and a friend who had passed long before their time. These memories lived in the corners of the home, gentle reminders of love and loss. Scout followed him to the kitchen, waiting as Keanu filled a bowl with food. The sound of kibble hitting metal echoed softly in the night. Once Scout settled, Keanu leaned back against the counter and breathed deeply, letting the silence stretch. The moment at the diner replayed itself in fragments. Ivy's doubt, her tone, the way the entire room froze to watch. But it wasn't embarrassment that clung to him. It was the sharp awareness of being misjudged, not because someone recognized him, but because someone didn't see him at all. He walked to his desk near the window overlooking the city. Los Angeles shimmered in the distance, a patchwork of lights across the hills and avenues. His phone sat waiting beside a small stack of letters. A blinking notification showed a new voicemail. He tapped the screen and the familiar voice of his friend and event coordinator, Maya, filled the room. She reminded him about the upcoming motorcycle charity auction. They needed him to confirm the final list of items. They also needed a short video message to promote the event. She ended with her usual warmth, telling him she hoped he was resting and taking care of himself. He set the phone down and lifted one of the letters. It was from his sister. She wrote about her latest treatment, about the book she'd been reading, about how she missed their evening phone calls. She had added a small sketch at the bottom, a silly drawing of the two of them as kids riding bicycles down a sloping hill. Keanu traced the outline with his thumb, feeling both comfort and ache. His eyes drifted toward another object near the stack, a simple envelope marked with a handwritten name. Mrs. Tran, the owner of the diner he had just been forced to walk out of. The envelope with Mrs. Tran's name rested where he had left it the night before. Inside was a handwritten note and a donation he'd planned to drop off discreetly during his next visit. She had been quietly struggling to repair a faulty stove burner in the back kitchen and had mentioned it in passing one evening while wiping down a counter. Her tone had been casual, but Keanu could hear the worry behind it. Equipment repairs weren't cheap, and small family diners lived on margins most people never thought about. He had written the note immediately, intending to slide it under her office door the next time he came in for soup. Tonight had changed that plan. He picked up the envelope and sat on the edge of the couch. Scout padded over and rested his chin on Keanu's knee. He scratched the dog's head absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting backward through months of quiet evenings at the diner. He remembered the first night he met Mrs. Tran. She had approached his table with a warm smile, not the type given to celebrities, but the type reserved for people she genuinely wanted to welcome. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. She only cared that he looked tired and needed a hot meal. She had insisted on bringing him extra broth, saying he looked like he needed it. Her kindness had settled in his heart more deeply than she could ever know. He remembered watching her encourage her young servers, reminding them to breathe during busy hours, reminding them that patience mattered more than speed. She ran the diner with a kind of gentle discipline, shaping a team that felt more like a family than a staff. Keanu admired that. He admired people who built community from simple places. And that was why he returned again and again. Not for recognition, not for attention, but for the feeling of being grounded in a place that didn't demand anything from him. A place where he could simply be a person. A place that had accepted him until tonight. He set the envelope back on the table and pressed his hands together, thumbs resting against his lips. Ivy hadn't known him. She hadn't known Mrs. Tran valued him. She hadn't known about the tips he left always hidden beneath napkins, or slipped into the bill holder so no one could thank him. She hadn't known he had helped cover the cost of a staff member's medical bill months earlier when he overheard Mrs. Tran whispering to her husband about it in the back hallway. Ivy had seen a tired man in worn clothes, a man who looked out of place, a man she assumed was lying. He exhaled slowly. It wasn't her fault, he told himself. She was young, she was new. He didn't know what pressures or fears she carried when she stepped into that job, but her reaction still lingered like a bruise, not from the volume of her voice or the attention it drew, but from the distance it reminded him existed between himself and the world he tried to move through quietly. He rose from the couch and walked toward the hallway. The pictures on the walls caught his eye, moments frozen in time, smiles with friends who were gone now, landscapes from places he visited alone. His footsteps echoed softly as he passed them, each frame reminding him of the complicated relationship he had with visibility. People saw him everywhere, but not always as a person. Sometimes as a symbol, sometimes as a headline, sometimes as an idea of who he should be. But tonight, no one had seen him at all. He reached his bedroom doorway and stopped, letting the weight of that truth settle in the quiet space between his breath and his thoughts. Keanu stepped into his bedroom and turned on the small lamp beside the window. The soft light revealed the familiar textures of the room, the worn armchair in the corner, the bookshelf filled with novels he reread on quiet nights, and the framed postcard from his sister taped to the mirror. He sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle around him until it felt almost warm again. The diner incident kept circling back in his thoughts, not as a sharp memory, but as a gentle ache. It wasn't the mistake Ivy made, or even the words she said. It was the reminder that people didn't always understand him, no matter how quietly he tried to live. He had spent years choosing humility, keeping his head down, giving quietly. Tonight revealed how easily even good intentions could be misread by someone trying to protect their space. He leaned back, resting his hands behind him, staring at the faint glow of the city outside his window. Mrs. Tran had built a place rooted in kindness, yet without her there, the spirit of it had faltered. He wondered what she would say if she knew what happened. He wondered, too, what he should do next. And for the first time that night, an idea began forming. The morning sun crept slowly over the Hollywood hills, brushing a warm, golden light across Keanu's kitchen. He stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, pouring coffee into 2 simple ceramic mugs. Scout patted around his feet, sniffing the air, as if he sensed that today carried a different rhythm from the night before. Keanu looked down at him with a faint, tired smile, grateful for the quiet loyalty that never asked for explanations. He set one of the mugs on the counter and reached for his phone. A text from Elias had arrived just after dawn. It read as it often did after long days or complicated weeks with a single word. Coffee. Keanu replied with the same quiet simplicity. The park. Minutes later, he was walking along the winding path of a neighborhood park shaded by tall eucalyptus trees. The air carried a hint of morning cool, and the distant sounds of the city had not yet swelled into full motion. He saw Elias sitting at their usual bench near the duck pond, tapping a spoon against the edge of a paper bowl filled with oatmeal. Elias stood when he spotted him, his expression immediately shifting from sleepy to concerned. "You look beat," he said, accepting the mug Keanu handed him. "Rough night." Keanu sat beside him, elbows resting loosely on his knees. "Not rough," he said quietly. "Just unexpected." Elias took a sip of the coffee and glanced sideways at him. You're not usually up before the sun unless something's on your mind. Keanu nodded. There was an incident at the diner last night. The word incident was gentle compared to the sting still echoing faintly beneath it. He told Elias everything. The new hostess, the ID, the disbelief, the accusation, the muttered comments, the silent room of strangers watching him leave. He described it without anger or defensiveness, only a soft, steady curiosity that surprised even him. Elias listened carefully, his brow tightening as the story unfolded. You're telling me she thought you were pretending to be... You? Keanu gave a small shrug. She didn't know. She was protecting her job, I guess. That doesn't excuse the way she spoke to you. No. Keanu agreed, but maybe it explains it. Elias tapped the rim of the mug with his thumb, thinking. Still sounds like she judged you pretty hard. She judged what she saw, Keanu said. A tired man in worn clothes. She probably thought I was trouble or someone trying to get attention. Elias let out a quiet sigh. That doesn't make it right. No, Keanu repeated, but I keep thinking about why she reacted that way. People don't lash out like that unless something else is weighing on them. Stress, fear, life. Elias studied him for a moment. Most people would be furious, you know. I'm not, Keanu said softly. It just made me think. About what Keanu gazed at the water where a duck glided in gentle arcs. About how quickly people form ideas about each other. And how easily small places, good places, can fall apart when one moment turns sour. Elias tilted his head. You're not thinking about never going back there, are you? No, Keanu said. I'm thinking about what it means for the people who work there, for the place itself. Mrs. Tron wasn't there last night, and she's built something meaningful. It just slipped for a moment. Elias leaned back, waiting. So what are you thinking of doing? Keanu didn't answer yet. The idea wasn't formed, only circling, but it was growing. Elias watched him carefully, sensing that the silence meant more than uncertainty. It meant something was forming in the spaces between Keanu's words. He took another sip of coffee and waited. Keanu's thoughts often unfolded slowly, shaped by reflection rather than impulse. Finally, Keanu spoke again. What if last night wasn't about humiliation at all? What if it was a reminder of what Elias asked? That kindness doesn't always show itself, Keanu said, and maybe that's when it needs to be practiced most. Elias raised an eyebrow. You're talking like a monk again. Keanu chuckled softly. Maybe. But think about it. People are struggling. People are tired. They don't always know how to offer warmth to strangers, especially young people trying to prove themselves. She doesn't know me. She only knows the pressure of the job. That still doesn't mean you have to take it on the chin, Elias replied. You could tell Mrs. Tron. She'd set the record straight. Keanu shook his head. That would only hurt her, and it wouldn't change anything. So what would Elias ask? Keanu looked down at his hands. They were worn, calloused from work at the community center, from riding, from carrying equipment. Hands of someone who preferred doing over speaking. I don't want to react with ego, he said. That never leads to anything good. I want to respond in a way that helps the place grow instead of tearing someone down. Elias leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. All right. You're circling around something. What is it? I keep thinking about the diner, Keanu said. How much heart it has. How many nights I've gone there when I needed quiet. How many times Mrs. Tran has offered a warm meal without ever asking who I was. A place like that deserves care, not judgment, not punishment. Are you saying you want to help them? After last night, Keanu nodded slowly. It feels right. Not because of what happened, but because it reminded me how delicate good places can be. Elias let the word settle. So what does help look like? That's where I'm stuck, Keanu admitted. I don't want to show up with money. I don't want to make a gesture that feels like charity. And I don't want anyone to know it's me. The world doesn't need another story about a celebrity swooping in to fix something. Elias smiled slightly. You want to do it quietly, as quietly as possible. Elias rubbed his jaw, thinking, You know, restaurants like that run on thin margins. They could use support, training, equipment, marketing, the works, but it would need to be done carefully, respectfully. Exactly, Keanu said. Something that strengthens them instead of embarrassing them. Elias leaned back, stretching his legs. What if the answer isn't you giving them help, he said, but creating a reason for them to accept it? Keanu turned toward him. What do you mean, disguise the help, Elias said. Wrap it in something neutral, something that feels earned, not gifted. A community grant, a neighborhood award, a recognition program, something that celebrates them instead of putting them under a spotlight. Keanu's eyes lifted a spark, igniting. A recognition program, yes, Elias said. Imagine a foundation one that supports small, community-based restaurants. It selects the diner for a special initiative, training, upgrades, a sponsored evening. No one questions it, no one feels ashamed, and no one knows who's behind it. The idea hung between them steady and alive. Keanu felt something shift inside him. Not vengeance, not ego, something better, something that felt like restoration. Keanu let the idea settle, allowing its shape to become clearer. A program that uplifted the diner without exposing anyone. A gesture that honored the place, not himself. He felt the heaviness from the night before shift, slightly replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. The tension behind his ribs eased, not because the memory faded, but because it now pointed him toward something constructive. Elias watched the change in his posture. You're already planning, aren't you? Just thinking, Keanu replied. A foundation like that would need structure. It would need credibility. And you can create that, Elias said. You have contacts in the nonprofit world. You understand the needs of small community spaces. And more importantly, you care. Keanu looked toward the pond where sunlight shimmered across the surface. If we do this, it can't be about me. I don't want my name anywhere near it. That's the point, Elias said. It stays anonymous, a quiet gift to a place that means something to you. Keanu nodded slowly. And it would help more than just the diner. We could expand eventually, support other small restaurants, recognize places that hold their communities together. Elias grinned. Now you're talking like a man with a mission, maybe, Keanu said. But for now, just one place, one moment, one chance to turn something painful into something better. So what's the next step? Elias asked. Keanu rose from the bench, stretching his shoulders as if shedding the weight of the night before. We start simple. A cover story, a community spotlight, something that feels legitimate. And after that, Elias said, standing beside him. Keanu picked up his empty coffee mug. After that, we make sure the diner shines. And no one ever knows why. The decision settled between them, quiet and resolute. A beginning born from a moment of misunderstanding. The late afternoon sun slanted through the wide windows of the community center, casting soft squares of light across the floor. Children's voices echoed from the gym where an after-school program was underway. Laughter bounced off the walls as kids chased basketballs, worked on homework, or clustered around tables filled with crayons and craft paper. The hum of activity created a warm backdrop as Keanu and Elias stepped inside the multi-purpose room, each carrying a notebook and a quiet sense of intent. This place had always grounded them. Whenever life felt heavy, they returned here to the noise and motion of children learning and growing. Today, though, they weren't here to teach or assist. They had come to build something new, something meaningful. They settled at a long wooden table near the back of the room. From here they could see the mural painted across the far wall, a vibrant collage of community hands, bright colors, and hopeful words. It reminded Keanu of why he wanted to act, why he refused to let last night become an ending. It needed to be a beginning. Elias opened his notebook, flipping to a clean page. All right, he said, tapping his pen. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. What exactly do we want the program to accomplish? Keanu took a moment before answering. We want the diner to thrive, he said. Not just survive. We want to give them tools, support, recognition, something that validates what they already bring to the community. And we disguise it as a community award, Elias added, something that lets them accept help without feeling like they're being singled out. Exactly, Keanu said. A spotlight. Not on me, on them. Elias grinned. Then let's name it. They brainstormed quietly for several minutes, tossing out ideas. Some were too flashy, some too vague, but then Keanu said something that made Elias pause. What about the Community Spotlight Initiative? Elias repeated it slowly. Community Spotlight Initiative. It sounds official, positive, accessible, broad enough to cover anything we need to do. And modest, Keanu said. Nothing grand, just a light shining on a good place. Perfect. Elias agreed, writing it at the top of the page. From there, the ideas flowed faster. Elias outlined what a typical community award program might include: training sessions for staff, upgraded equipment, a sponsored evening offering free meals to local families, marketing materials, a small ceremony to present the recognition. Keanu listened, refining the vision. We need a night that feels special, he said. One unforgettable evening for the neighborhood and for the staff, something that lifts their spirits. Free meals, Elias suggested. Yes, Keanu said. Let the community experience the heart of the place without worrying about cost. What about repairs or upgrades, Elias asked. If we do that, Keanu said, it has to be discreet, scheduled at night, framed as part of the award package. And staff training. Absolutely, Keanu said, but framed as professional development, not criticism. Elias jotted everything down, his handwriting growing quicker as the plan formed. This is going to take resources, he said. I'll cover it, Keanu replied gently. Anonymous, always. Elias nodded. We'll run it through a private grant. Something clean, something that keeps your name off every document. Keanu felt a quiet sense of clarity settle over him. This wasn't revenge, this wasn't pride, it was restoration. A chance to strengthen something fragile without asking for anything in return. And tomorrow, Elias said, closing the notebook, we reach out to the diner. Keanu exhaled slowly. Tomorrow. As the after-school program continued around them, the noise of bouncing basketballs and excited chatter filled the air. It gave a kind of rhythm to their planning, a reminder of why places like the diner mattered. They were small, but they fed people. They welcomed strangers. They anchored neighborhoods. They were the quiet threads that kept a community stitched together. And Keanu wanted the Community Spotlight Initiative to honor that spirit. Elias spread out several printed templates on the table, mock grant forms, sample award descriptions, and event outlines he had used for other nonprofit projects over the years. We'll need to build something that looks established, he said. Professional. Credible. Even if it's brand new. Keanu nodded. We can't have them thinking this is unusual or targeted. It has to feel natural. Exactly, Elias said. We'll create a clean website, a simple one-page explanation of the initiative. A mission statement that highlights community enrichment. Nothing too bold, just something warm and organized. I'll fund the first round, quietly, Keanu said. And if this works, maybe we expand it later. Elias's eyebrows lifted. You're already thinking long-term. Why not, Keanu said. If it helps more places like the diner, it's worth it. The sincerity in his voice made Elias smile. All right. So for the diner specifically, we need to decide what we're offering. Let's outline it. He wrote 3 bullet points: free community dinner night, training sessions, physical improvements. Keanu leaned in. For the free dinner, we should involve volunteers. People from the neighborhood would love to help. I can coordinate that, Elias said. Food distribution networks, local nonprofits, even some small businesses. They'll get on board quickly. For training? Keanu said maybe we connect them with hospitality consultants. People who understand customer service, kitchen efficiency, conflict resolution. And we frame it as a gift. And the upgrades, Elias asked. We keep them practical, Keanu said. Repair the stove, fix the leaks, replace the chairs with something comfortable but durable. Improve lighting, small changes that make a big difference without overwhelming them. Elias wrote everything down, nodding along. It's a solid plan, but one thing we need to discuss is messaging. How do we present this without raising questions about the founder? Keanu looked at him with quiet determination. We don't mention a founder at all. We keep it simple. The initiative operates as a collaborative community project. No single person, no story attached. Just a mission. That helps, Elias said. People won't dig if there's nothing to find. Keanu exhaled slowly. Good. Then another thought surfaced. What about the letter? The invitation. Elias tapped the notebook. We'll draft a formal message congratulating the diner for being selected. We'll highlight their role in the neighborhood, their cultural significance, their positive reviews, anything that makes it feel natural. Will they believe it? Keanu asked. Elias shrugged lightly. Most small businesses don't expect attention. That makes the recognition feel meaningful. And once they see the resources we offer, they'll accept. Keanu felt a glimmer of warmth at the idea. Mrs. Tron will appreciate it. She's poured everything into that place. And Ivy Elias asked gently. Keanu paused. This isn't about correcting her. It's about helping her grow without knowing why. Maybe one day she'll understand. Maybe not. Elias nodded. That's fair. Keanu watched one of the volunteers gather a group of kids into a circle for story time. Their faces lit with curiosity. Their laughter rose freely. He felt the same quiet truth settle in his chest again. Small places mattered. Small moments mattered. Helping quietly mattered. The room around them gradually quieted as the after-school program transitioned into pickup time. Parents filtered in, collecting their children with tired smiles and grateful hugs. The fading noise gave Keanu and Elias a clearer space to finalize their plan. Elias flipped to a new page in his notebook and drew a small box at the top. This, he said, will be our outline for the launch. Step 1 is drafting the official invitation. We can send it tomorrow, Keanu said. Morning would be best. That way Mrs. Tron sees it before the lunch rush. Step 2, Elias continued, is securing the consultants and contractors. I'll reach out to my contacts tonight. We'll keep everything under the name of the initiative. Keanu nodded. And step 3 is funding. You're sure you want to do it anonymously? Elias asked, even though he already knew the answer. Yes, Keanu said. No fanfare, no attention, just good work being done. Elias smiled at the certainty in his voice. Then we'll run it through the private grant account. Clean and simple. They reviewed the timeline, making small adjustments. They agreed to schedule the renovation work at night. They agreed to let the community meal be the centerpiece of the celebration. They agreed that the staff training should feel uplifting rather than corrective. By the time they closed their notebooks, the sun had dipped low and the last of the children had left. The golden light in the doorway flickered softly as Keanu stood, feeling the quiet satisfaction of something purposeful beginning to take shape. So it's settled, Elias said. Tomorrow we reach out. Yes, Keanu answered, and with any luck, this becomes the start of something good. They left the community center together, carrying a plan built not from hurt, but from hope. Ivy's Koreatown apartment was small enough that every sound carried from one corner to the other. The faint hum of an old refrigerator blended with the clacking of a ceiling fan that wobbled each time it turned. The place wasn't much, but it sheltered her, her mother, and her 12-year-old brother, Lucas. Ivy had learned long ago that survival didn't require perfection, only persistence. And she persisted every day. That night, after her shift at the diner, she pushed the apartment door open, with her hip balancing a plastic bag of leftover rice and soup in one hand. Lucas bounded out from the living room, eyes bright with hope. "Did you bring food?" "Of course," Ivy said, handing him the bag. "Heat it up, okay?" "Don't eat it cold." Her mother sat at the small dining table, rubbing her temples. She looked up with a tired smile. "Long shift." Ivy dropped her purse onto the chair beside her. "You could say that." She tried to shrug off the tension in her shoulders, but the memory of the strange customer kept surfacing. She didn't usually dwell on moments at work. People came and went, some polite, some rude, most forgettable. But tonight's encounter had left a subtle pressure in her chest, like a pebble in a shoe that refused to be ignored. Her mother watched her carefully. Something happened. Ivy hesitated, then let out a short laugh. "You won't believe this. Some guy walked in claiming to be Keanu Reeves." Her mother blinked. "The actor." "Yeah," Ivy said, pulling off her apron and tossing it onto the table. "He showed me an ID and everything, like I'd fall for that." Her mother's expression tightened with concern. "Are you sure he wasn't—" Mom, Ivy interrupted. "Keanu Reeves doesn't show up alone to a tiny diner in Koreatown, in worn clothes, looking like he needed a nap." Her mother didn't laugh. She only looked thoughtful. "This city surprises you sometimes." Ivy waved her off. "Trust me, he was just some guy trying to get attention." Lucas peeked around the corner, a spoon in his mouth. "Was he mean?" "No," Ivy said the word, catching her off guard. "He wasn't mean. He was quiet." "How quiet?" Lucas asked. Ivy frowned slightly, like he wasn't trying to prove anything, like he knew who he was and didn't need me to believe it. Her mother lifted an eyebrow. "That sounds like the real Keanu Reeves." Ivy shook her head quickly, unwilling to entertain the thought. "No, impossible. I would have known." But even as she said it, a small part of her felt uncertain. His eyes had unsettled her, not because they were familiar, but because they carried something she hadn't expected. Something steady, something patient, something that didn't match the behavior of someone trying to deceive her. She brushed the thought aside and joined Lucas and her mother at the table. They ate quietly, grateful for food for each other, and for one more day handled with resilience. After dinner, Ivy retreated to her room to finish homework for her night school class. She was exhausted, but she pushed through chapters of required readings, refusing to fall behind. Her father used to tell her that education wasn't just a path out, it was a promise to herself. When she finally crawled into bed, the lights of Koreatown flickering through her window, the quiet stranger's face appeared again in her mind. She tried to dismiss it, but something about him lingered. The next morning arrived faster than Ivy wanted. Her alarm buzzed at 6 a.m., jarring her from a light, restless sleep. She rubbed her eyes, tried to shake off the fog in her head, and forced herself up. There was no time for slow mornings. Lucas needed breakfast. Her mother needed help with the bills. And she needed to catch the early bus to make it to the diner before the morning rush. She tiptoed around the apartment, getting ready quietly so she wouldn't wake her mother, who had finally fallen asleep after staying up late sewing alterations for extra income. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the city was already humming. Koreatown was relentless that way. It demanded your pace match its own. On the bus, Ivy leaned against the window, letting the steady vibration settle her nerves. She replayed the previous night in her mind, not because she wanted to, but because the memory forced itself forward again and again. She remembered the moment the man handed her his ID. She remembered how calm he looked when she accused him. She remembered something shifting in her chest when she insisted he leave. But she clung to her logic. People lied all the time. People pretended to be celebrities to get attention. She had every reason to be cautious. Even so, the quiet in his voice haunted her. When she arrived at the diner, the place was unusually still. The neon sign hadn't been turned on yet, and only a few of the kitchen staff were inside prepping for breakfast service. The usual smell of onions sizzling on the grill hadn't started drifting through the air. Instead, there was a strange tone of anticipation hanging in the space. Mrs. Tran, the owner, stood near the office door with her phone in her hand, her brow furrowed. She looked up the moment Ivy walked in. "There you are," she said. "Come, I need to talk to you." Ivy froze. Those words were never comforting. She followed Mrs. Tran into the back office, swallowing the nervous tightness in her throat. The small room was cluttered with receipts, delivery boxes, and old framed photos of the Tran family, but today there was a new tension in the air. Mrs. Tran sat at her desk and turned her computer monitor toward Ivy. "An email came last night," she said. "Around midnight." Ivy blinked. "An email. From who?" "A community organization," Mrs. Tran said, tapping the screen with her finger. "It's called the Community Spotlight Initiative. They say we've been selected for a neighborhood recognition event." Ivy frowned. "Recognition for what?" "For contributing to the cultural identity of Silver Lake," Mrs. Tran read aloud. "They want to feature us as a model of multicultural dining. They're offering to sponsor a full evening of free meals, cover staffing bonuses, and even make minor upgrades to the restaurant." Ivy stared. None of this made sense. That sounds too good to be true, she said cautiously. Did we apply for something like this? No, Mrs. Tran said. And that's what confuses me. She clicked to show the rest of the message. The email was professionally written. It included a mission statement, a complete itinerary, and a signature from someone named Daniel Hart, listed as a program coordinator. Ivy read through the details, and with each line, her skepticism sharpened. Why would an organization pick us? We're small. We don't advertise, and our reviews are hit and miss. Mrs. Tran let out a slow breath. I don't know, but the tone sounds official. Ivy narrowed her eyes at the final line. We hope to celebrate your contribution to the community. Please respond within 48 hours. She looked back at Mrs. Tran. Do you think it's real? I don't know, Mrs. Tran said softly, but something tells me this is bigger than it looks. A chill crept over Ivy's skin, subtle but undeniable. For the first time that morning, she wondered whether last night's encounter had something to do with this. As Ivy stood there, the uneasy feeling in her stomach deepened. She traced the edge of the desk with her fingertips, trying to anchor herself. The email might have been legitimate, but the timing felt almost unreal. Less than 24 hours after she had turned that quiet man away, an opportunity like this suddenly appeared. It didn't fit together neatly, yet she couldn't shake the sense that something unseen was moving behind the scenes. Mrs. Tran watched her closely. Ivy, I want your opinion. You're good at reading people. Does this feel sincere or dangerous? Ivy hesitated. Her instinct told her to distrust anything that promised too much. Life had taught her to expect the catch, the fine print, the disappointment. But when she reread the final paragraph, something softened inside her. The language wasn't predatory. It was hopeful. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself wanting it to be true. I think, she began slowly, it might be worth exploring. Even if it's nothing, we lose nothing by asking questions. Mrs. Tran nodded, relief flickering across her face. Then we'll respond, she said. But as Ivy stepped out of the office, one thought followed her like a shadow. What if the man she dismissed wasn't lying at all? The decision came quickly, once Mrs. Tran replied to the Community Spotlight Initiative. Their coordinator responded within hours, confirming the date and outlining the steps they would take to prepare the diner for the neighborhood celebration. A wave of excitement rippled through the small restaurant, a kind of hopeful electricity that had been missing for a long time. Ivy felt it the moment she walked in for her shift. The staff, who usually moved through the morning with quiet routines, suddenly had an extra spark in their step. The cooks were humming. The dishwashers were smiling. Even the regulars seemed to notice something in the air. The diner, worn around the edges and tired from years of service, felt as though it had taken a deep breath. Mrs. Tran gathered everyone in the dining room right before opening. This is our chance, she said. They chose us. They want to honor us, and we are going to show them we deserve it. Her voice was steady, but Ivy saw the shimmer in her eyes. Mrs. Tran had poured everything into this place, decades of work, sacrifice, sleepless nights, and the pride of keeping a family business alive in a city that swallowed small shops whole. To her, this wasn't just an event, it was validation. Ivy felt something stir inside her. For once, she wasn't just showing up to clock in. She wanted this night to succeed. She wanted the diner to shine. She wanted to contribute to something bigger than her exhaustion and her routine. Her tasks multiplied immediately. She wiped down menus, polished silverware, reorganized the hostess stand, and deep-cleaned corners she'd never bothered with before. She checked the reservation system, tightened bolts on loose chairs, scrubbed stubborn stains from the tile grout, and worked alongside the servers to clear out years of clutter from the supply closet. But the changes didn't stop at cleaning. 2 days after the initiative's reply, a delivery truck arrived with new chairs, modern but warm, sturdy but comfortable. The staff watched in astonishment as workers carried in the boxes, replacing the wobbly old seating that had frustrated customers for months. Who paid for all this? One of the cooks whispered, Mrs. Tran said the program covers it. Another replied, They exchanged glances, amazed. That afternoon, Ivy noticed men in uniforms inspecting the plumbing. They replaced old pipes. They tightened loose fixtures. They flushed out systems that hadn't been touched in years. She listened to the rush of water flowing clean and strong once the repairs were done, and it felt symbolic, like the diner was waking up again. Every improvement made Ivy more curious. Whoever ran this initiative wasn't cutting corners. They were doing everything with care. Thorough, quiet, intentional. And through it all, she worked harder than she had in months. Her hands were raw from scrubbing. Her feet ached. But she didn't complain. A part of her felt like she was making up for something she couldn't yet admit aloud. Each night after closing, she remained behind with a few staff members to help reorganize storage rooms and take inventory. They laughed more than they usually did. They moved with purpose. They reminded each other that something special was coming. And when she finally returned home each night exhausted, but strangely hopeful, her mother noticed. "You're glowing," she teased gently. Glowing. More like dying. Ivy sighed, dropping onto the couch. Her mother shook her head. "No, something's changing in you. Maybe this opportunity is a sign. Maybe this is a second chance for you in the place." The words settled in Ivy's chest like a soft truth waiting to bloom. The upgrades continued at a steady pace over the next several days. Ivy found herself memorizing the faces of the contractors, painters, and technicians who came through the diner. They were all polite, efficient, and strangely coordinated, as if they belonged to a single team working from the same unspoken plan. Yet none of them ever mentioned the name of the person funding or organizing the improvements. Anytime Ivy probed gently, they simply said they were hired by the initiative and moved on with their work. One evening, long after the dinner rush ended, Ivy stayed late to help wipe down the tables. The smell of cleaning solution mixed with lingering traces of garlic and soy from the kitchen. She felt tired, but the kind of tired that came with purpose. Mrs. Tran stepped out of the office holding a clipboard. "Ivy, she said they scheduled wall repainting tonight. You can head home if you want." "I know you've been here all day." But Ivy shook her head. "No, I'll stay. I want to see how it turns out." Mrs. Tran gave her an appreciative smile before returning to the office. Ivy rolled up her sleeves and got back to cleaning. She didn't notice the front door shifting open in the dark. She didn't see the figure stepping inside until she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the corner of the dining room. She turned, startled. A tall man in a cap, hoodie, and gloves stood by the entryway. He carried a tray of paint supplies and a quiet presence that somehow didn't feel threatening. Before she could ask who he was, two other painters entered behind him, greeting him casually. "Evening, man," one said. "We'll start in the kitchen. You take the west wall." He nodded, then glanced at Ivy. Their eyes met for only a second, but something in that second made her breath catch. A flicker of familiarity, a softness, a kindness that didn't match the shadows he wore. "Sorry," she said, quickly embarrassed. "I didn't know painters were coming this late." "No problem," he answered in a low, gentle tone. "We work nights. Less disruption." Something about his voice tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it. She shrugged it off and resumed cleaning tables while he set his supplies near the west wall. As the painters dispersed to different areas, Ivy found herself glancing at him again. He worked deliberately, brushing slow, even strokes across the wall. He moved with care, almost reverence, as if the work meant something personal. She had never seen a contractor take that much pride in repainting an old diner wall. She stepped closer, unsure why. "You've done this before?" she asked lightly. He smiled beneath the shadow of his cap. "A few times. You're very careful with it." He nodded. "Places like this matter. They hold a lot of stories." Ivy blinked, surprised by the depth in his words. She wasn't used to strangers speaking with that level of sincerity. She opened her mouth to respond, but he had already turned back to his work, giving her time to retreat without awkwardness. Back at her station, Ivy found her heart beating faster than she expected. Something about him unsettled her, but in a way that felt strangely safe, as though he saw more than she realized, as though he carried understanding instead of judgment. And all the while, she felt a quiet whisper inside her. Why does he feel familiar? When the painters finished the first coat, the tall man stepped back, surveying the wall with quiet satisfaction. Ivy watched him for a moment, still trying to identify why his presence felt so strangely comforting. She almost approached him again, but something held her back. Maybe it was shyness. Maybe it was the sense that he carried a weight she didn't yet understand. As she gathered her things to head home, her mother's words drifted back to her. Maybe this is a second chance. The idea warmed her unexpectedly. She looked around the diner, now brighter and cleaner than it had been in years. Something inside her softened. She wanted this place to succeed not just for Mrs. Tran or the staff, but for herself. She needed a win. She needed proof that life could turn upward. Before leaving, she glanced once more toward the west wall. The painter was still working his brush, moving slowly and thoughtfully. She didn't speak. She simply observed him, feeling gratitude she couldn't explain. Walking out into the night air, Ivy felt a new sense of hope settling in her chest. She had no idea that the man quietly restoring her workplace was the same one she had hurt, and he expected no apology. Saturday arrived with an energy Ivy had never felt inside the diner before. From the moment she pushed open the front door that afternoon, she knew the night would be different. The sunlight spilled across the newly polished floors, bouncing off the freshly painted walls. The scent of simmering broth, ginger grilled chicken, and sweet soy filled the air as the kitchen staff prepared early for the waves of guests who had already begun lining up outside. Silver Lake was buzzing. Word had spread quickly through neighborhood groups, social media pages, and families who told each other about the special event. Free community dinner, courtesy of the Community Spotlight Initiative. People didn't know who funded it, but they knew the diner had been chosen for something important, and that was enough to bring them out in droves. By 5 o'clock, an eager crowd wrapped around the block. Parents held their children's hands. Elderly couples arrived in their best jackets. Students came with backpacks slung over one shoulder. A group of musicians from the Arts District stood in line, tuning their instruments to pass the time. Laughter floated in the air, mixing with the crackling neon hum of the restaurant sign. Inside, Ivy was glowing. She had spent the last hour coordinating the volunteers from the community center, positioning them at tables, showing them where to refill waters, and teaching them the flow of the dining room. She moved with confidence she didn't even realize she possessed. Her voice was crisp, steady, warm. Staff listened. Volunteers followed her lead. Even Mrs. Tran stood behind the counter watching Ivy with quiet pride. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Tran told her. "Your father would be proud." Ivy swallowed hard and nodded, pushing through the swell of emotion. She forced herself back into motion before her heart could weigh her down. Tonight wasn't about grief. Tonight was about possibility. At exactly 5:30, the doors opened and the first wave of guests entered. The room filled instantly, every table occupied in minutes. The hum of conversation grew into a gentle roar of happiness. Servers glided between tables. Volunteers distributed baskets of freshly baked rolls. The kitchen staff worked like a finely tuned machine, sliding steaming plates onto the pass counter faster than Ivy had ever seen. It felt magical. In the middle of this growing whirlwind, no one noticed the two quiet figures who slipped in through the side door and took a booth in the corner. Keanu and Elias sat down without drawing attention. Both wore simple jackets and caps, blending seamlessly into the crowd. The booth they chose was in the shadowed corner where the lighting softened, giving them a clear view of the entire dining room. Keanu sat facing the room, his posture relaxed, his eyes warm as he took in the scene. Families leaning closer together over their meals, children laughing as they shared bites, elderly neighbors clinking cups of tea, the volunteers smiling widely as they delivered plates. No cameras, no spotlight, no one looking at him with the burden of recognition, just humans sharing a moment of joy. Elias leaned back, observing it all with a satisfied grin. "You did this," he whispered. Keanu shook his head gently. "No, they're doing it. We just nudged the spark." As Ivy passed by their booth carrying a stack of menus, she didn't even glance at them. Not a flicker of recognition. No hesitation. She moved with purpose, delivering menus to a family of 5 before turning back toward the kitchen. Keanu watched her, sensing something different in her tonight. A lightness, a focus, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before, and he felt grateful she never looked twice at him. Tonight wasn't about him at all. As the evening deepened, the diner transformed into something Ivy had only dreamed of. The soft glow of the hanging lanterns cast warm light across the tables. The newly painted walls seemed brighter now that they held the sound of real laughter instead of tired conversations. Every inch of the space pulsed with life, as if the building itself was celebrating. Ivy moved quickly across the floor, her notepad tucked into her apron, even though she didn't need it tonight. The event had no bill, no menu restrictions, no stress about mistakes. The initiative had insisted that tonight be about hospitality, not business. She simply guided people into seats, refilled water glasses, and checked on plates. She smiled so much her cheeks hurt. Volunteers from the community center worked beside her with enthusiasm. They were students, retirees, and local artists who had answered the call to help. They carried plates with careful hands, wiped tables between seatings, and chatted with families as if they'd worked here for years. Ivy Table 7 needs another iced tea, called one volunteer. On it, she answered, weaving between tables with practiced grace. She didn't realize someone was watching her from across the room. Keanu observed her quietly from his booth, sipping a cup of jasmine tea. He hadn't planned to focus on her specifically, but she naturally drew the eye. Perhaps it was because he'd seen her earlier in fear and pressure, and now she seemed to bloom in the right environment. Her voice carried a new steadiness. She laughed easily. She listened deeply. She treated every guest as if they mattered. "She's finding her stride," Elias said, noticing where Keanu's gaze lingered. "She just needed space to show who she really is," Keanu replied, and maybe Elias added softly, "She needed this night." Keanu nodded, eyes returning to the scene unfolding around them. At a large table near the center of the room, a family celebrated a grandmother's birthday, singing as she blushed and covered her face. At another table, 2 teenagers shared dumplings and shy smiles. A group of construction workers toasted small cups of broth like it was champagne. A little girl waved to Ivy each time she walked by, and Ivy always waved back. Moments like these stitched together a night that felt richer than any charity gala or formal event Keanu had ever attended. Here, no one pretended. People weren't performing. They were simply living, sharing, experiencing a break from the weight of the world. That was the real purpose of tonight. Not recognition, not prestige, connection. Keanu continued to watch the room flow like a living organism. Plates clinked. Chopsticks tapped. Conversations rose and fell like waves. The air was full of warmth that wasn't tied to decoration or money, but to the people themselves. No one knew the man behind this transformation was sitting among them, and that anonymity made the experience even sweeter. At one point, Ivy approached the booth next to theirs, checking on an elderly couple who had finished their meal. "How was everything tonight?" she asked gently. "Wonderful," the woman said. "This place feels alive again." "Yes," Ivy agreed softly. "It really does." She turned away, moving on, without noticing the man, who sat only a few feet away, smiling with quiet pride. Tonight belonged to her. Tonight belonged to the community. And Keanu wanted it that way. As the night reached its peak, the diner felt almost enchanted. Ivy stood near the entrance for a moment, just breathing it in. She saw families lingering long after their plates were empty. She saw shy strangers becoming friends over shared dishes. She saw Mrs. Tron wiping her eyes discreetly behind the counter. It was everything she hoped the diner could be. When she finally stepped outside for a brief breath of air, the sidewalk was just as alive. People chatted under the streetlights while waiting for a table. Children played along the curb. A musician strummed a soft tune near the doorway, adding warmth to the night. Inside, Keanu watched Ivy as she returned to the dining room, moving with renewed spirit. He could tell she felt the shift in herself, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Tonight wasn't simply a community event. It was a turning point. Elias leaned forward. Do you think she'll ever realize you helped make this happen? Keanu gave a small shake of his head. She doesn't need to. What matters is that she believes in this place now. He looked around the room one more time. Hope was multiplying, and that was enough. The night continued unfolding in ways no one could have predicted. The deeper the evening went, the brighter the diner seemed to glow. With each dish served, each conversation shared the room filled with warmth that went far beyond food. Ivy couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so many people smiling in one place. She moved through the dining room with steady purpose, taking in every detail, making small adjustments where needed, and offering gentle words to guests who seemed overwhelmed by the generosity of the night. Then the front door opened, and something shifted in the energy around her. A man stepped inside hesitantly. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had been overlooked far too many times. Behind him stood a little girl, no older than 8, clutching his hand tightly. Her backpack was faded, her shoes were scuffed. She looked around the bustling diner with wide eyes, taking in the warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, Ivy froze. It wasn't the sight of poverty that stilled her, but the vulnerability etched into their expressions. They weren't here for the spectacle or the excitement. They were here because they had nowhere else to go. She stepped forward before anyone else could. "Hi there," she said gently. "Welcome." The father swallowed. "We heard the meals tonight were free. If it's too full, we can wait outside." "You're not waiting outside," Ivy said immediately. "Come with me." She led them through the crowded dining room, past families celebrating and neighbors chatting. Instead of seating them near the back, she guided them toward the table with the best view in the diner, a corner booth near the window freshly polished with warm light spilling across it. "This one is for you," she said. The little girl looked up at her with surprise. Really, Ivy answered. "Sit wherever you like." As they settled in, Ivy brought them warm tea without being asked. She made sure the kitchen prepared the freshest dishes and returned with a tray full of food. The father tried to protest, but Ivy placed her hand lightly on the table and shook her head. "You're our guests," she said. "Please enjoy tonight." Keanu watched the interaction from across the room. He felt something stir inside him as he saw the father's shoulders loosen, the little girl's face brighten, and the heaviness in their eyes lift just a little. It was a simple gesture, but sometimes the smallest acts of grace carried the greatest impact. Elias leaned forward. "She didn't hesitate," he murmured. "No," Keanu replied quietly. "She didn't." They continued watching as Ivy crouched down beside the little girl, chatting softly with her about school, the food, and the night sky outside the window. When the girl smiled and laughed shyly, Keanu felt the moment land in his chest like a soft echo. Something was changing in Ivy, and it was happening in real time right before the eyes of the entire room. As Ivy stood from the little girl's booth, she felt something warm settle in her chest. She couldn't name the feeling, only that it made her want to work even harder. She stepped back into the flow of the night, unaware that almost everyone who had witnessed the moment had felt the shift too. People saw her differently now. They saw her heart, not her hurried steps or tired eyes. They saw a young woman trying her best to make others feel valued. Near the counter, an elderly woman rose slowly from her seat. She had silver hair pulled into a neat bun and wore a floral scarf draped around her shoulders. With a grace that made the room quiet without effort, she began humming a soft melody. At first, Ivy thought it was simply a nostalgic tune, but as the notes carried through the diner, customers started turning their heads. The humming grew into actual singing. Her voice was gentle but steady, as if she had once spent her youth singing on stages before life took her down quieter paths. A few diners whispered in surprise. Others leaned in closer. Then something beautiful happened. Another voice joined her, then another. Within moments, the entire center of the diner was filled with soft, harmonious singing. The melody floated through the warm light, weaving itself between tables. Parents held their children closer. Couples smiled at each other. Even the kitchen staff paused at the pass counter, letting the moment wash over them. Ivy stood still, overwhelmed. She had never imagined the night would grow into something like this. She felt her throat tighten as she watched the elderly woman close her eyes and lift her chin slightly as if remembering a version of herself she had not visited in years. When the final note faded, the entire diner erupted in applause. The elderly woman laughed shyly and bowed her head. Ivy rushed toward her with tears prickling her eyes. "That was beautiful," Ivy said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you. You made tonight even more special." "I just sang what I felt in my heart," the woman replied softly. Across the room, one of the cooks stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He approached Ivy quickly, catching her off guard. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in a warm hug. "Ivy," he said, voice thick with emotion, "thank you for today. You brought life back into this place." She blinked in surprise. "I didn't do this alone." "But you carried the spirit of it," he insisted. "We all felt it." She stood there for a moment, stunned by the sincerity around her. For so long she had walked through life, feeling unnoticed, tired, and stretched thin. Now, for the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her. People saw her. They valued her. They trusted her. Elias leaned toward Keanu again. "She's different tonight." Keanu nodded slowly. She just needed a moment to show who she really is. And with that, he knew their work here was almost complete. As the diner continued glowing with energy, Keanu and Elias slipped quietly out the side door, unnoticed, leaving the night to shine on its own. The morning after the event, Ivy woke up with the strange sensation that something inside her had shifted. Her muscles ached from the long night, but her heart felt strangely light. She rolled over, grabbed her phone, and saw dozens of notifications lighting up the screen. Messages from coworkers, comments from friends, and tags from people she didn't know at all. Confused, she opened the first link someone had sent her. It was a photo taken by a customer the night before Ivy, standing beside the little girl she had seated in the special booth, both smiling shyly into the camera. The caption read, "This young woman gave us hope last night." Another photo showed Ivy handing tea to the girl's father with gentle understanding. More images followed, volunteers serving meals, the elderly woman singing Mrs. Tran, waving at guests and families gathered around plates of food with gratitude on their faces. Someone had stitched these moments together into a short video montage and uploaded it on social media with the simple title, "Silver Lake Diner's Night of Heart." It had already gone viral. Ivy covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. She had never been the center of anything. She had always assumed her work went unnoticed, but here, in hundreds of comments, strangers were thanking her, calling her kind, calling her inspiring, saying she reminded them that people still cared. At the bottom of the video post was a message from a local news page. "Whoever funded this deserves recognition." But the young hostess with the brave smile made the night unforgettable. She closed her eyes, letting the words settle into the parts of her heart she had neglected for too long. Later that morning, she walked into the diner for her shift, expecting everything to feel normal again. Instead, Mrs. Tran stood behind the counter, holding her phone, wiping tears with the edge of her apron. When she looked up and saw Ivy, she beckoned her over with trembling hands. "Ivy," she whispered, "read this." She handed her the phone. Dozens of comments poured in under a post from the diner's official page. Longtime customers wrote messages about how proud they were to return. Former employees commented that they never thought the place could feel alive again. Families shared photos from the event. Students from the community center thanked the staff for welcoming them. Someone even wrote, "This feels like the beginning of something beautiful." Ivy's throat tightened, her eyes blurred. She had never imagined the diner could bring so many people together. And she certainly never imagined her small decisions could ripple outward like this. "People remember kindness," Mrs. Tran said softly, "and last night you gave them a reason to believe in it again." Ivy didn't know how to respond. She just let herself lean into the moment, absorbing the gratitude around her. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. What she didn't know was that somewhere miles away, Another person was reading the same comments quietly, privately, and with a smile that held both pride and a resolve. Across the city, Keanu sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee warming his hands. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, landing softly across stacks of motorcycle magazines, handwritten letters, and a few framed photographs that never moved from their place. His dog rested at his feet, breathing steadily. Keanu scrolled through his phone, following a link Elias had sent with no explanation, besides 2 words, "You'll smile." He watched the video of the diner's community night, slowly absorbing every frame. The shots of Ivy helping the homeless father and daughter, the elderly woman singing, the volunteers moving with joy, the staff embracing each other with renewed purpose. And at the center of it all, Ivy's steady, warm presence. He replayed the moment where she crouched beside the little girl, speaking to her with kindness that didn't need to be taught. Keanu exhaled a soft smile, pulling at his lips. This, he whispered to himself, is why we do it. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Elias. Phase 1 went better than expected. Ready for the next step, Keanu didn't hesitate before typing back. Yes, it can't just be one night. He set his phone down and leaned back thoughtfully. The night had given the diner a spark, but sparks only mattered if they ignited something lasting. He didn't want the diner to fade back into struggle once the excitement wore off. He wanted the foundation to be solid. He wanted Ivy and the staff to have the tools and stability they deserved. A plan began forming in his mind. He knew the building needed deeper repairs than the temporary fixes they had arranged. The kitchen equipment was aging. The roof needed reinforcement. The exterior could use fresh signage and proper lighting. Beyond the physical renovation, the staff needed support, customer service training, new management systems, and even scholarships for employees like Ivy, who were studying at night. There was so much potential waiting beneath the surface. He picked up his phone again and called Elias. We start phase 2, quietly, Keanu said. Deep renovation, skills development for the staff, maybe even a scholarship program. Elias laughed softly on the other end. You really want to build this place up. I want to build the people up, Keanu corrected gently. They're the heart of it. And, Ivy, Elias asked. Keanu paused. She's growing. She has leadership in her. She just needs someone to believe in her without making a big deal of it. We can do that, Elias said. Quietly, of course. Quietly, Keanu affirmed. As he hung up the phone, he looked again at the video thumbnail glowing on his screen. Ivy, standing in the center of the diner, surrounded by warmth and community, unaware of the deeper forces at work behind her. She deserves stability, he murmured. They all do. Outside, the morning light grew brighter, signaling a new day. And for the diner, for Ivy, and for the neighborhood of Silver Lake, a new chapter was quietly beginning. For what comes next? A month passed, and the excitement of the community night still lingered in Silver Lake like a warm echo. Customers continued returning to the diner, drawn by the renewed sense of hope and belonging that had taken root. But behind the scenes, a quiet transformation was already underway. The second phase of the initiative had begun, and the plans were far bigger than anyone except Keanu and Elias knew. One morning, Mrs. Tron gathered the staff before opening hours. Her voice trembled slightly as she delivered the news. We're closing the diner for 10 days, she announced. The foundation wants to begin the renovation immediately. Murmurs rippled across the room, surprise, confusion, excitement, worry. Ivy stood among the staff, blinking in disbelief. She knew improvements were coming, but 10 days, full closure, that meant something major. Mrs. Tran continued, they've planned structural repairs, kitchen upgrades, and new booths. They say everything will be done quickly but thoroughly. All expenses covered. A stunned silence followed. Ivy felt her heart flutter with a strange mixture of anticipation and fear. The diner had been her second home, and the idea of it changing so drastically was both thrilling and overwhelming. The next morning, the contractors arrived. Trucks lined the street. Workers moved in and out with tools, ladders, and protective gear. The foundation's name was printed on every badge and clipboard. The staff stood on the sidewalk watching as the transformation began. The old booths were removed first. Ivy couldn't help but touch the cracked vinyl one last time, remembering the countless families who had sat there, the conversations she had overheard, the quiet nights and chaotic mornings the booth had survived. It felt like saying goodbye to a piece of history. Inside the kitchen, stainless steel counters were installed along with brand new ovens and stoves. Industrial-grade ventilation replaced the rattling old one. Refrigerators that had struggled for years were swapped with modern, energy-efficient units. Everything was cleaner, sharper, brighter. Ivy visited each morning with Mrs. Tran to check on progress. Each day revealed something new: fresh paint, new flooring, upgraded lighting. The ceilings were reinforced. The windows were replaced. The restrooms, once a source of constant complaints, were remodeled completely. One evening, when the sun had dipped behind the hills and the construction crew had gone home, Keanu walked quietly into the diner through the back entrance. He wore a simple hoodie, jeans, and a cap that shadowed his face. The scent of freshly cut wood and new paint filled the air. Tools lay neatly arranged along the counter. The dining room was half finished, but the promise of what it would become already shone through. He moved slowly through the space, studying the progress. He ran his hand along the smooth new booth frames. He checked the kitchen equipment installed earlier that day. He crouched down to inspect the tile work near the drink station. Every improvement mattered, because every improvement would shape the future of the people who worked here. Elias joined him minutes later, carrying a stack of training packets under his arm. "They arrived?" Keanu asked. "Fresh from the publisher," Elias replied, tapping the stack. "Customer service, leadership development, food safety, conflict resolution, hospitality essentials. Everything a small restaurant staff needs." Keanu nodded, relief settling into his expression. The real change wasn't just the building, it was the people. It was Ivy, and her journey was just beginning. The next week unfolded like a dream Ivy never realized she had been waiting for. Each morning when she arrived to observe the progress, she discovered something new that stirred her imagination. The walls no longer carried the faint stains of years past, but instead held a clean, warm tone that made the space feel larger. The lighting, once dim and uneven, had been replaced with gentle fixtures that cast a soft, welcoming glow. Even the layout had shifted slightly, opening the space to encourage easier movement and connection. She watched the workers with fascination. They moved with precision, their actions synchronized, as if they had renovated dozens of restaurants just like this. They never rushed, never cut corners, and never treated the diner as a small, insignificant project. They handled it as though it were one of the city's most treasured landmarks. That alone humbled Ivy. During one visit, she noticed a stack of unopened boxes marked with the foundation's emblem. When she peeked inside, she found new uniforms folded neatly, each embroidered with the diner's name. Soft fabrics, breathable materials, and thoughtful details. A far cry from the heavy, outdated uniforms she had worn for the past year. She imagined the staff wearing them and smiling with renewed pride. On another morning, Mrs. Tran opened a delivery envelope addressed to her. Inside was a full set of printed training modules, each professionally bound. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, seeing topics like modern hospitality principles, conflict navigation, inclusive service practices, and leadership development. "This is incredible," Mrs. Tran whispered, overwhelmed. "They want us to grow." Ivy stood beside her, speechless. She traced one of the covers with her fingers. She loved learning, and she loved the challenge of improving herself, but she had never expected an opportunity like this. She wondered who created these materials, who decided the diner deserved more than surface repairs, who believed in their potential so deeply. Later that afternoon, Ivy received an unexpected call. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a representative from the hospitality program at a local college. Ivy stiffened, confused, as she listened. "We're thrilled to inform you," the woman said gently, "that you've been selected to receive a full scholarship to our certification program. Tuition materials and transportation support are included." Ivy nearly dropped the phone. She pressed a hand to her mouth as the words sank in. A scholarship. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of it. I I didn't apply, Ivy stammered. There is a nomination pathway, the representative explained. Someone submitted your name with a strong letter of recommendation. They wrote that you have exceptional leadership potential. Her voice thinned with emotion. Who nominated me? The submission was anonymous, the woman said. But they believed in you deeply. Ivy closed her eyes, trembling. Someone saw her. Someone believed. Someone cared. And it was changing everything. Weeks passed, and the newly renovated diner reopened with a quiet confidence that didn't need advertising to attract attention. Word of mouth alone kept the place full from morning to evening. Neighbors who had drifted away years ago now returned with pride. Families made it their weekly ritual. Students came to study in the bright booths. Even people who had never heard of the diner before found themselves drawn in by the warmth and sincerity that radiated from the space. Ivy noticed it every day. The energy had shifted. The diner wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. She felt it in the way customers greeted her with familiarity, in how the staff smiled more often, and in the steady rhythm that had developed as they moved through each shift. She had grown into her new responsibilities with an ease that surprised even her. The scholarship program would begin in a few months, but the confidence it gave her had already changed the way she carried herself. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when the lunch rush was beginning to settle, the front bell chimed softly. Ivy glanced up from the counter, scanning the doorway, as she had done thousands of times before. For a moment, she didn't recognize the man entering. He wore a simple dark jacket, a worn baseball cap, and faded jeans. He moved without calling attention to himself, taking slow steps, as if he were returning to a place he once knew. Then Ivy felt something tug at her memory. She watched as he walked to the same corner booth where he had once sat unnoticed. He slid into the seat calmly, his posture relaxed, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out over the bustling dining room. It took her a full 10 seconds before she whispered to herself, "No way." She blinked, stared again, and then shook her head. It couldn't be. She had seen celebrities online on billboards on screens, but in real life they looked different, more ordinary, more human. And yet there was something unmistakable about this man's quiet presence, something familiar, something she had seen only for a brief moment the night he painted the wall. But Ivy had a job to do. She smoothed her apron, steadied her breath, and approached his table. "Hi there," she said with a gentle smile. "Welcome in." He looked up at her, and for the briefest moment, she felt an unexpected warmth in his gaze. It wasn't the look of a stranger. "Thank you," he said softly. She hesitated, unsure why her voice felt caught in her throat. "You've been here before, haven't you?" For a second, the air between them felt still. His eyes held hers not with surprise or fear, but with a quiet knowing. Then he offered a small smile. "It's a beautiful place," he replied. "I'm glad I came back." Something in his tone struck her. Calm, familiar, almost comforting. She nodded slowly, but as she turned away, her heart whispered a question she couldn't bring herself to ask out loud. Why does it feel like he already knows this place better than he should? Ivy stepped away from the booth, but her thoughts refused to settle. She moved through the dining room, checking on tables, pouring water, and guiding volunteers. Yet every few moments her eyes drifted back to the man in the corner. Something about him stirred a quiet certainty she couldn't explain. She didn't want to assume anything, and she didn't want to come across as intrusive, but the connection she felt to him lingered like a soft echo she couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Keanu observed the diner with a sense of quiet pride. It wasn't the renovated walls or the upgraded kitchen that moved him the most, though both were beautiful. It was the humanity flowing through the place, the laughter, the shared meals, the comfortable rhythm of a community rediscovering itself. And at the center of all of it, Ivy moved confidently, giving guidance to the staff, encouraging volunteers, and offering reassuring smiles to guests. Elias had been right. She had grown so much. A server walked past with a tray of steaming bowls, and Ivy stepped aside for them with a graceful turn. When she caught another glimpse of Keanu, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, mixed with something deeper gratitude maybe, or the sense that he had somehow witnessed her becoming a truer version of herself. Finally, as the dining room calmed, she returned to the corner booth. "Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked. He nodded. "Tea would be great. Jasmine, if you have it." "We do," she said warmly. "I'll bring it right over." She walked toward the counter, replaying their exchange in her mind. His voice, his posture, his gentle smile. She knew she'd seen him before. But when customers came and went every day, yet this feeling was different. This was someone who mattered in a way she couldn't quite understand. Keanu watched her prepare the tea. She moved quickly, but with intention, never rushing, choosing her steps carefully. She reminded him of someone discovering their purpose without realizing they had already stepped into it. It brought a soft smile to his face. As Ivy returned to his table and set the tea down, she hesitated. "I know this might sound strange, but are you sure we haven't met?" Keanu lifted the cup gently, maybe in passing. She tilted her head. "If we did, I hope I wasn't rude." "You were doing your job," he answered simply. "And look at you now." She blinked. The compliment landed softly but carried weight she didn't fully understand. "Well, thank you," she murmured. "Enjoy your meal." She walked away slowly, her steps thoughtful. Something inside her stirred again, deeper this time. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was connected to their journey somehow, though she had no proof. Just instinct. Keanu looked down at the steam rising from his cup and breathed in the quiet joy of the moment. She was getting close to the truth, but he wasn't ready for her to know. Not yet. That night, long after the last customer left and the staff clocked out, Ivy walked home with a heaviness she couldn't explain. The evening air was cool, brushing against her cheeks as she replayed the shift in her mind. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant, as though her thoughts were pulling her backward while her body moved forward. She couldn't stop thinking about the man in the booth, his voice, his gentleness, the way he observed the room with calm intention, the quiet smile he offered when she asked if he had been there before. Something about him stirred memories she had pushed aside, the quiet painter who came late one night, the one whose presence had unsettled her, in a way she couldn't name, the one who had moved a brush with such care that she felt drawn to him despite herself. She reached her apartment, kicked off her shoes, and set her bag on the table. But instead of relaxing, she sank into the couch, staring at nothing. Her mind raced through everything that had happened over the past month. The mysterious foundation, the scholarship, the sudden renovations, the community spotlight event, the upgrades, the training materials, the humility of the volunteers. None of it made sense if it came from a typical nonprofit group. Something had been off from the beginning. Someone had been behind all of it. But who? Her mind returned to the painter, his voice, his posture, his stillness. She remembered the way he had spoken to her that night, how he said places like the diner held stories. She remembered how he moved through the shadows without fear, how even the contractors greeted him with a familiarity she'd dismissed as coincidence. And now today he had returned for lunch. The same calm energy, the same eyes, the same unmistakable presence. Her heartbeat quickened. No, it was impossible. She stood abruptly and paced the living room, pressing her fingertips to her forehead. "It can't be," she whispered. But the doubt gnawed at her. The resemblance, the softness in his tone, the way he had watched the diner as if he had built it with his own hands, the anonymous scholarship, the anonymous renovations, the silent generosity. All of it pointed toward someone who cared deeply while wanting no recognition. Someone the world knew for his humility. Her legs felt weak as she sat back down. She opened her laptop with shaking fingers. The screen glowed softly in the dim apartment. In the search bar, she typed his name before she could talk herself out of it. Keanu Reeves. Images filled the screen. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer, scrolling slowly. Years of photos appeared, movie stills, red carpet images, candid shots of him in everyday clothes, his hands tucked in pockets, head lowered, avoiding cameras. Then she found it. A candid photo of him in a simple hoodie cap, pulled low, walking through Los Angeles. No glamorous lighting, no performance. Just a quiet man moving through the world unnoticed, exactly like the man in the diner. Her hand flew to her mouth. She inhaled sharply, unable to look away. "No," she whispered into her palm. "No way." But the truth was already forming slowly, painfully, undeniably. What if it really had been him? Ivy shut her laptop halfway, then opened it again, unsure whether she wanted answers or wanted to run from them. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place whether she welcomed them or not. The painter's quiet grace, the anonymous generosity, the late-night presence in the diner, the foundation messages, the gentle way he had watched the room, the scholarship that came from someone who claimed to see her potential. And today the man who sat in the same booth sipping jasmine tea with the posture of someone who belonged among ordinary people, even though his face belonged to the whole world. She rubbed her forehead, overwhelmed. Her logical mind told her it was far-fetched. A celebrity wouldn't spend nights painting diner walls. A global figure wouldn't slip into small restaurants unnoticed. But another part of her, one she rarely trusted, whispered that sometimes the truth was found in the quietest actions, the ones that made no sense unless they came from someone who truly cared. She clicked on a video interview. The first words he spoke sent chills through her. His voice, soft, thoughtful, reflective. Exactly the same tone she had heard near the newly painted wall, the same calm cadence from the booth earlier that afternoon. Her breath caught. She shut the laptop completely this time. Her heart felt too full. "What do I do?" she whispered to herself. She sat in silence, staring at the wall for several minutes before finally standing and pacing again. The thought that someone like him would go to such lengths for a small diner in Silver Lake felt unbelievable. But the idea that he had seen her, really seen her, and believed she deserved a chance at a better life felt even more unreal. She paused in the middle of the room. There was only one way to know for certain. She reached for her phone and scrolled through old emails from the foundation. Near the bottom was a contact number. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Should she call? Would it be rude? Would she embarrass herself? Would they even answer? Finally, she pressed the call button before she could lose courage. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Community Spotlight Initiative," the voice said warmly. "This is Elias." Ivy froze. Her throat tightened. "Hi, this is Ivy from the diner." "Oh, Ivy," he replied cheerfully. "Good to hear from you. Everything going well?" She swallowed hard. Yes, everything is incredible. I had a question, a strange one." "Strange questions are often the important ones," he said gently. "Go ahead." Ivy's fingers trembled as she held her phone. "Is it true," she whispered, "that someone nominated me for the scholarship?" "Yes," Elias replied without hesitation, "and they stayed anonymous." "They asked too," he said. "They didn't want credit." Her breath shook. "And was it who I think it was?" Elias was silent for a moment, then his voice softened with a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Ivy barely slept after her call with Elias. His final words circled her thoughts with a quiet force she couldn't shake. He hadn't said the name outright, but he didn't need to. His pause, his tone, his gentleness, they were confirmation enough. She knew. Keanu Reeves had been behind everything. The realization filled her with a swirl of disbelief, gratitude, and a rising ache in her chest. The scholarship, the renovations, the night of community, the paint on the walls. The quiet man in the booth who had looked at her like he already knew the person she was trying to become. It was him. The next morning, Ivy woke with a single thought she couldn't ignore. She needed to talk to him. Not as a fan, not as someone asking for answers, but as a woman who needed to understand why a stranger would reshape her life in silence. She messaged the foundation asking politely if she could request a private meeting, not out of entitlement, but out of necessity. Hours passed. She tried to distract herself with chores, but her heartbeat felt like it was living in her throat. Then her phone buzzed. A simple reply appeared on the screen. He said yes, tomorrow, 10 a.m., bookstore cafe on Rowena. Quiet corner table. Ivy pressed the phone to her chest and exhaled shakily. Tomorrow. She had one night to gather her courage and steady her emotions. When the morning came, she arrived early, so early that the cafe had just opened, the scent of brewing tea drifting through the quiet aisles of books. She wore simple clothes, nothing extravagant, but she had tried her best to look composed. Her hands, however, trembled with every step. She spotted him immediately. A man with a calm posture, a dark jacket, a cup of tea already steaming in front of him. He sat at a small wooden table tucked in the far corner near shelves lined with poetry and travel memoirs. His head was slightly bowed, as if he were lost in thought. Ivy approached slowly, her pulse racing. When she reached the table, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were kind. "Hi," she whispered, barely trusting her voice. He nodded gently. "Hi, Ivy. Please sit." She lowered herself into the chair, gripping her hands together in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe hummed softly around them, but their corner felt suspended in stillness. Finally, Ivy drew a breath. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked despite her efforts to hold it steady. Keanu set down his cup. His expression was warm but calm, as though he had been waiting for this question. "Because it wasn't about me," he said softly. "It was about the diner, about the community, about you." Her eyes filled instantly. She blinked hard, trying not to fall apart in public, but the truth hit her with a force that left her chest aching. "You changed everything," she whispered. "And I didn't even know." He shook his head slowly. "You changed everything. I just helped clear the path so you could see what was already there." Ivy covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed, but he didn't rush her. He simply waited with the same quiet patience he had shown all along. Ivy lowered her hands slowly, her eyes red but steady. She searched his face, trying to make sense of the kindness she saw there. It felt strange, almost impossible, that someone so admired, so far removed from her world, could sit across from her with such humility. "I keep thinking I should apologize," she said quietly, "for that first night, for not recognizing you, for how I treated you." Keanu shook his head. "You were overwhelmed. You were doing your job. None of that mattered to me." "But it matters to me," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I judged you. I dismissed you, and you still did all of this." He offered a gentle smile. "I didn't help because of how you treated me. I helped because I saw something in you. You cared about people even when you were exhausted. You were protecting the diner. You were standing on your own even when life was heavy. That kind of heart deserves support, not judgment." Her eyes filled again. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to hold herself together. "I thought I was invisible," she whispered. "I thought I was failing." Then suddenly, everything changed. "You believed in me before I believed in myself." "You weren't invisible," he replied softly. "You were growing. And sometimes growth happens quietly." Ivy took a shaky breath. "I want to do something with all this. I don't want it to end with me. The diner is thriving. The community feels alive again. And I feel alive again. I want to help other places like ours, places that get overlooked, people who are trying their best with almost nothing." Keanu nodded slowly, as though he had been waiting for her to reach this point. "That's a beautiful idea." "It's more than an idea," she continued. "It feels like a purpose, a direction. I want to pass on what you gave me." He leaned back slightly, studying her with thoughtful eyes. "Elias and I have been talking about something similar. A real foundation. One that supports small restaurants, community hubs, and young workers with potential. Quiet support. Meaningful resources. Real transformation." Ivy stared at him, breath caught. "We wanted to launch it soon," Keanu added. "But we needed someone who understood the heart of these places, someone who had lived it, not just studied it, someone who could represent the mission with sincerity." Her pulse quickened. "And you think That could be me." "I know it can," he said, "if you want it." Ivy felt her world shift, the weight of her past struggles. The hardship, the self-doubt all collided with the possibility of what lay ahead. For a long moment she couldn't speak, then slowly she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to help. I want to be part of it." A smile grew on his face, warm, proud, quietly relieved. "Then let's build it," he said. The transformation that began in a single Silver Lake diner did not stay contained within its walls. Change rarely does. It moves quietly, softly from one heart to another, from one moment of kindness to 1,000 more. And before long, the world outside began to feel the ripple. It started with a story, a simple one, that circulated through community pages, small business forums, and local newsletters. People talked about a diner that had nearly faded away, only to rise again through compassion, teamwork, and an anonymous act of generosity. The story wasn't dramatic enough for headlines, nor sensational enough for national buzz, but it didn't need to be. It traveled in the way meaningful things do, quietly, steadily carried by those who believed in what it represented. And at the center of the movement was the newly formed Community Spotlight Initiative. With Keanu's quiet backing and Elias's organizational skill, the non-profit became real. Legal documents were drafted, partners joined discreetly, and a small operational team took shape. Everything was modest by design. No flashy announcements, no media coverage, no public unveiling, just impact. The first official project funded by the foundation was the diner itself. Not just its renovation, but its survival, its growth, and its newfound role in the neighborhood. The second project was already in the works, another family-owned restaurant on the verge of closing due to a broken refrigeration system and late rent. They didn't ask for attention. They didn't ask for charity. But the foundation stepped in quietly, offering repairs resources and a plan to stabilize their operations. Ivy stood at the center of this expanding web of good. Her scholarship program had begun, and with each class she attended, she found herself growing more confident in hospitality management. She understood customers better. She understood staff dynamics better. She could see patterns, recognize problems early, and offer solutions that once felt impossible. But what moved her most was the new responsibility she carried mentoring. Every week, Ivy visited a different diner or cafe in the Los Angeles area. She wasn't there as a celebrity or a consultant. She arrived with a humble notebook, sat beside overwhelmed owners and anxious young managers, and simply listened. She asked gentle questions. She learned their histories, their challenges, and their hopes. Then she offered guidance shaped by her own journey. Sometimes it was advice on layout changes. Sometimes it was staff communication. Sometimes it was emotional support, reminding exhausted workers that their dreams still mattered. Word spread quietly among small restaurants that a young woman named Ivy could help. No one knew her connection to a famous actor. No one guessed that the foundation supporting them had been born from a night when she wept in a corner booth, unaware of who sat watching her potential unfold. Meanwhile, the original diner had become a neighborhood anchor again. Customer lines often stretched to the sidewalk. Staff turnover dropped dramatically, something unheard of in the industry. Local teens seeking first jobs found opportunities there. Tran began offering free meals on Sundays to people in need, inspired by the night everything changed. And through all this growth, somewhere in the background, unseen, uncelebrated, was Keanu. He never asked for credit. He never stepped into the spotlight. He simply watched from a distance, proud of the ripple he had helped begin, knowing it now belonged to others. As the months passed, the changes woven through the community grew deeper and more visible. The diner that once struggled to fill half its seats now bustled from sunrise to closing. It became a place where regulars gathered each morning, not only for food, but for comfort and connection. The staff carried themselves with newfound pride, knowing they were part of something larger than a workplace. And though most customers never knew the full story, they felt the difference the moment they walked through the door. Ivy watched it all unfold with astonishment and quiet gratitude. She had stepped into a role she never imagined for herself, balancing her studies with her growing responsibilities at the foundation. She helped design mentorship programs, coordinated small grant distributions, and visited restaurants that reminded her of where she once stood. She saw owners relieved by the support, young workers inspired by her guidance, and communities strengthened by places that refused to disappear. Each time she entered a new diner or cafe, she carried her experiences like a bridge. She shared what had helped her, what had changed her, and what she learned through both failure and growth. She wasn't a polished professional yet, but her authenticity made people listen. They trusted her. They related to her. They understood that she had walked through the fire they were trying to escape. The foundation expanded slowly but steadily, always focusing on personal connection before financial assistance. It wasn't just about fixing buildings. It was about rebuilding people. It was about giving a fighting chance to small restaurants that served as the heartbeats of their neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed in the shadows of the movement. He attended meetings quietly, usually sitting at the back of the room. He offered ideas gently, never pushing for acknowledgement. When donors joined, he allowed Elias to take the lead. His only request was that the work stayed genuine, grounded, and free of publicity. Sometimes late at night, Keanu would drive past the original diner. He would slow down and watch through the window as families laughed over steaming plates, or as Ivy trained a new team member with patience and kindness. He never stopped inside on those nights. It wasn't necessary. Seeing the diner alive was enough. One evening, he saw a group of teenagers outside collecting donations for a local food pantry. The diner had become a hub not only for meals, but for community outreach. Ivy had organized the effort, encouraging customers to participate. Watching them, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment settle in his chest. The ripple had grown beyond anything he could have orchestrated alone. It was a reminder that true change didn't come from grand gestures or loud announcements. It came from belief, from kindness, from lifting one person who in turn lifted others. And Ivy was doing exactly that. 3 months passed, and the diner had settled into its new rhythm. Every morning, Ivy arrived early to make sure the doors opened on time. The coffee brewed warmly, and the staff began the day with calm confidence. She moved with a grace that still surprised her sometimes. Whenever she caught her reflection in the polished windows, she barely recognized the young woman who once walked into work, exhausted, uncertain, and unsure of her worth. Now the diner thrived, not just in business, but in spirit. Customers often lingered long after their meals ended, staying for conversations, quiet moments, and the sense of belonging the place offered. Staff turnover had become almost non-existent. Young teens in the neighborhood lined up for part-time positions, hoping to learn from Ivy and Mrs. Tran. The diner had become a symbol of resilience, second chances, and hope, though most people didn't know the true story behind its rebirth. But Ivy carried it with her every day. One late afternoon, as she prepared to finish her shift, Mrs. Tran approached holding a small brown parcel. It was neatly wrapped with no return name on the label, only the diner's address written in careful handwriting. Ivy, Mrs. Tran said this came for you. For me, Ivy frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. She rarely received mail at the diner. Mrs. Tran nodded. It was left at the back door. No delivery truck, no courier. Someone must have dropped it off. A soft flutter of curiosity rose inside Ivy. She accepted the parcel and stepped into the quiet office, closing the door gently behind her. The room felt still, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the desk. Her fingers trembled as she peeled back the wrapping. Inside lay a folded piece of clothing. Ivy lifted it slowly. A faded hoodie. Her breath caught. It was familiar, the same hoodie the quiet man with the paint had worn the night she dismissed him. The same hoodie she kept seeing in her memory every time she regretted how she treated him. She pressed the fabric to her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of what it meant. For a moment she sat still, letting a wave of emotion wash over her. Then she noticed the envelope tucked beneath the hoodie. Her name was written on the front. She opened it carefully, half afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately, simple, slanted slightly to the right, steady. The note read, "We all have moments where we don't see clearly. What matters is what we do afterward." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. A single tear slipped down Ivy's cheek as she read the words again. They didn't carry judgment. They didn't hold resentment. They offered gentleness, understanding, and the kind of grace she had been learning to give herself. She held the hoodie close, feeling the full circle of her journey settle into her heart like a warm truth. He had forgiven her long before she learned to forgive herself. Ivy sat alone in the small office, the soft hum of the kitchen muffled behind the thin wall. The faded hoodie lay across her lap, its fabric worn in places, the cuffs frayed just slightly from years of gentle use. She traced one seam with her fingertip, imagining the quiet man walking into the diner that night, tired but patient, polite even as she questioned him. She remembered the look in his eyes, not anger, not offense, something quieter, something steadier, as if he carried a world of pain he never spoke about and still chose kindness anyway. The weight of that memory pressed into her chest. She folded the note again carefully, almost reverently. The words echoed in her mind. What mattered was what came after. What mattered was the change. And somehow he had seen that change in her from afar. He had watched her grow into someone she wasn't sure she could become. Someone stronger, someone gentler, someone capable. A soft knock tapped at the door. Ivy. Mrs. Tron peeked inside. "Is everything okay?" Ivy wiped her eyes quickly, though the traces of emotion lingered in her voice. "Yes, I just got a message, a really important one." Mrs. Tron stepped into the office, her eyes falling immediately on the hoodie and the paper. "Is that from who I think it's from?" "I don't know," Ivy said softly, "but I think you do." Mrs. Tran gave a smile of someone who had seen more than she let on. Some people move quietly in this world. They don't ask for attention. They just make things better. Ivy nodded slowly. He didn't owe me anything. He didn't need to do any of this. That is what makes it meaningful, Mrs. Tran said. Kindness is most powerful when no one demands it. Ivy looked around the transformed diner, the fresh walls, the polished tables, the new kitchen equipment humming steadily. She thought of the staff who now walked in with pride, the customers who felt welcome in a way they hadn't before, the young teens who found direction here. One moment of misjudgment had become the beginning of something bigger, something she was now responsible for carrying forward. "I want to hang the note in the front of the diner," Ivy said suddenly, not with an explanation, just there. As a reminder, Mrs. Tran placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think that's a beautiful idea." They walked together to the front wall, the one space Ivy always kept for something meaningful but had never known what to place there. She framed the handwritten note in a simple wooden frame and hung it carefully, adjusting it until it rested perfectly straight. Customers noticed immediately. Some paused, reading the words with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Others smiled without fully understanding why. The note carried a feeling, a softness, a truth everyone could sense, even if they never learned its origin. The hoodie remained in the office, folded neatly in a drawer where Ivy kept things too sacred to lose. And for the first time since that night, months ago, she felt whole. The early morning light drifted through the quiet cafe window, settling softly around Keanu as he sat alone at a small table near the corner. A gentle breeze carried the smell of roasted beans through the room, mixing with the faint murmur of distant traffic outside. He wrapped his hands around a warm cup of coffee, letting the calm of the moment settle over him. After months of watching the transformation unfold, this quiet corner felt like the right place to breathe and take it all in. No crowd, no noise, just space to reflect. He looked out at the street, watching people pass by with hurried steps, unaware of how many silent stories existed within just a few feet of where they walked. He often thought about this, how easy it was to overlook someone, how easy it was to assume, and how often people never knew the weight others carried with them. The night he had been turned away from the diner had been embarrassing in its own small way, But embarrassment wasn't what stayed with him. What stayed was the reminder that everyone carried their own struggles. Everyone had moments where fear or exhaustion clouded their judgment. A soft smile touched his face as he pictured Ivy's journey. From the uncertain young hostess who stood guard out of habit and exhaustion to the confident manager who welcomed strangers with warmth. The shift had not happened in a single night. It came through experiences that cracked her open just enough for growth to find its way in. She had learned to see people more clearly, to look for the soul behind the surface. And she had learned to believe in herself with a strength that hadn't existed before. Keanu took another sip of coffee, the cup warm against his palms. He thought about the diner now, the laughter, the comfort, the pride humming through its walls. The change wasn't about new paint or polished tables. It was about what people felt when they walked in, a sense of dignity, a sense of hope, a sense that this little corner of the neighborhood belonged to them. And to see Ivy step into leadership with such heart reminded him why he chose to stay quiet, to stay invisible in the process. Some transformations were more powerful when they were not tied to a name. He leaned back slightly, breathing in the stillness. Fame had never been what mattered. What mattered were the quiet moments when he could help without expectation, when he could lift someone up simply because they deserved the chance to rise. He never needed thanks. He never needed recognition. Watching others discover their strength was its own reward. His gaze drifted toward the cafe door as a father and daughter walked in hand. Their soft laughter pushed gently against the silence, and for a moment Keanu let himself appreciate the simple purity of the scene. Life's beauty, he thought, was always in the smallest acts, the unnoticed gestures, the second chances. He closed his eyes briefly, letting gratitude settle in his chest, not for what he had done, but for what others had become. Keanu opened his eyes again and let his gaze return to the window, watching sunlight stretch across the sidewalk. The world outside moved at its usual pace. Cars rolled by. A cyclist drifted down the hill. A pair of teenagers laughed as they crossed the street. Life carried on in its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the extraordinary moments unfolding quietly between strangers every day. He thought again about Ivy. He pictured the framed note on the diner wall. He imagined her stepping back each morning to look at it before unlocking the doors for the day, not as a reminder of shame, but as a symbol of transformation, a symbol that mistakes did not define a person. What defined them was what they chose afterward. She had chosen compassion service and leadership. She had chosen to lift others the way she had been lifted. And she wasn't alone in that. Mrs. Tran had rediscovered pride in her life's work. The young cooks had new training and purpose. The teens who found jobs there learned discipline and dignity. Families returned to the diner because it had become a place that felt safe, warm, and hopeful. That small restaurant had woven itself back into the community fabric thread by gentle thread. Keanu let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of quiet satisfaction settle into him. This was why he believed in silent generosity. Not because he wanted to hide, but because the impact belonged to the people who lived it. They were the ones who made the changes real. They were the ones who carried it forward. He had simply nudged open a door. A server passed by and placed a glass of water on his table without asking. He thanked her with a nod. She moved on, unaware she had just stepped into a moment of reflection for a man who carried more stories in his heart than he ever shared aloud. That anonymity comforted him. It reminded him he was just another person trying to do the best he could with the time he had. He lifted his coffee cup once more, holding it lightly in his hands. The warmth reminded him that life was a series of small kindnesses offered one moment at a time. That night in the diner had started with misunderstanding, but it ended with hope. A hope that spread far beyond the four walls where the mistake happened. A hope that continued to ripple through people who would never know the full story. He set the cup down gently and let one final thought settle in his mind. Judgment was easy. Anyone could fall into it. But offering someone a second chance, choosing compassion instead of bitterness, that was where change lived. That was where the world shifted, even if only a little at a time. And so the question lingered, reaching beyond the walls of the cafe, beyond the screen where this story was being heard. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances? What would you do if life offered you a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what story you'd like to see next.